Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. Today we had, after a little bit of a break, some travel, some family time, we had our first podcast back in a while, and it was amazing that we had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Nicola Amadora. She is a spiritual teacher, psychologist, therapist. She kind of brings all aspects to her teaching, and man, she was awake with it and such a light to talk to.
Yeah, I found it's funny because we worked through all of my Chopra connections from so many years, and then we worked through some of our friends, and now and I found this source through Jack O'Keefe, who we interviewed a few months ago, and they both Jack and Nicola, who we interviewed today, are the co-founders of the Association for Spiritual Integrity. And it's a beautiful organization that is interested in bringing some cohesion and some quality control to spiritual teachers.
Yes.
And so she talks, and we had a great conversation about a lot of different things. And I just loved connecting with her, and gonna do a private session with her myself. But she's online. I'll have the links to everything below to have how to find her. Very, very blessed to have met her and interviewed her. So enjoy the conversation with Nicola.
Yes, enjoy.
Hello, Nicola. Welcome to our podcast.
Hello, Corinne. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you for having me there.
So lovely to see you zooming in from Portugal.
Yes, a different part of the world. A place that has people too. We have to laugh. It's very important to laugh in life.
Isn't that true? That was one of the first things. I studied with Deepak Chopra. He was like my first teacher. And he used to, one of the first things he ever said was enlightenment means to lighten up.
That's a very good sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're going to dive right in because Sean and I are so excited to hear about your story, your journey, and hear your wisdom along with it. So many seekers can recall that point in time when, their conditioning no longer worked for them and something, seemed sort of fishy. So do you remember a turning point when you became a seeker and things started to open up?
Yeah, I had many turning points and they went deeper and deeper, but I would say the first turning point was really significant. They were actually the first two were so significant because it turned my whole life upside down and inside out. It was when I was 14, I was a teenager at that time in Germany, and there were no spiritual books, by the way. It was just like, that wasn't the era. And I was suffering really badly and really extreme. And then I had what you would now classify as a near-death experience. But I was revived again. And when that happened, I saw so much more than I had ever thought could exist. And one of the things was that I just immersed in this enormous light. And I was shown things, I was told things, and I really wanted to leave the planet. I had no more interest and wanted to get the hell out of here. Because this was no cheesecake walk where I was in, but I was sent back. I was told, no, you have a mission. We ask you to go back. It's very important. So with great reluctance, I came back. And once I had recovered, I was walking around in the world and thinking, what has happened? This is so different than what I imagined in my delusional mind before. I just could feel that there's so much more here. It's like a veil that keeps us separate. And I suddenly was immersed in this tremendous light, even when I was walking in my body on this earth. And of course, that sent me right into the spiritual path. And at that time, there were no words for awakening or any of this. I was on my own. So the only book I could find was like The Still Small Voice Within, a tiny little meditation book. So I, after school, I went into the woods and I started meditating, and the plants started talking to me, the animals, and I opened to dimensions that no one talked about. But I didn't feel it was crazy. I just felt like I'm coming home to what's real. And that sent me to, I had this urgent wish after high school to go to India, because I knew, I had heard there's great masters there. And one of the masters I wanted to see was, at that time, was Mother Theresa in Calcutta. I wanted to work with her. But I also went to a guru and lived in an ashram there. And I went to the Tibetans in the Himalayas, to a great Tibetan master. So I spent a year in India, and I would say that was my biggest turning point of my life, because it solidly steeped me in the truth. I only wanted the truth, or I wanted what I called love, true love. I was so thirsty and so hungry that I did things that most people say, and you did this all alone. I didn't even think twice about it. It was like, I had to buy this ticket to India. I had to go into completely the unknown. Nowadays, it's easy to travel in India. But at that time, it was pretty difficult. It was, and the Western woman with blonde hair, well, it wasn't the kind of thing that you usually see in India. And when I landed, I could feel, well, you probably have been in India, right?
Sean has not.
I have not yet, but Corinne has, yes.
He's been there through me.
Corinne has been, that's right. And so what a shock it was probably for you for the first time. Yeah, you come into this total different lifestyle.
What year was that? The first year I went was the year 2000. That was when I started going.
I was there already. My God, I cannot quite count back, but let's say in the early 80s.
Wow.
So really, really early. And when I came into the ashram, I was just like, I felt like I'm home. I was like, the daily chanting and the daily prayers and the rising in the morning at 5 o'clock with the birds. It was like, oh, there are people who are all longing for the truth, who are longing for the truth of love, and who have seen, in some more than others, have seen there is so much more to life, and that I'm not this body or this mind or these emotions, that I have that, and it's wonderful. But when I sat the whole night on that mountain in the ashram all by myself, I was so in pain of longing that I said, you must take me home. I will not move from this spot until it has happened. And I didn't even know what should happen. It was totally in the, it was just coming completely from my being. And so I sat on this mountain the whole night through in prayer. And believe me, I love to sleep. So I kept myself awake with lots of chai. And I just kept doing this one prayer. Speak to me, show me yourself, God. And in the morning, I never forget that amazing morning where the sun rose and the birds just start singing. But it was just one, the first bird that started singing. And suddenly in that song, I heard, "Be still, I am God." And it wasn't just the words, it was the whole, all of a sudden, I just felt completely drenched in love. It was so visceral, that I just started sobbing. I just sat there for another couple of hours before I even could move, because it was like, it expanded me, not just in my consciousness, but in my heart. Cracked open my heart. That was, well, I thought it was open, but it wasn't really. I mean, it was open to a certain level, but it just pierced me right through. And after, I felt like days before, I felt like I was walking literally in the dark, as if I had a dark shield in front of me. But the moment that happened, I pierced the darkness, and literally the dawn was rising in me as well. And because, you know, the first time when I had that out-of-body near-death experience, it was like the light, of course, I was in it, but then my conditioning just closed everything up again, and I just lived in the remembrance. And every time I meditated, I could feel it, but it wasn't really, it hadn't cracked the shell inside of me. And in that moment, I felt like I'm not separate. And it wasn't a thought, it's just the knowing, and that God is right here. So
that's, if you don't mind, you going back to when you were 14, and you did mention that you had a lot of suffering and a lot of pain. Do you mind being more specific about what that suffering is, or do you mind sharing that?
I will. Anybody likes to have a hell story.
Well, yes, people want to commiserate. They want to know that somebody else has pain like they do. I feel, you know, it's like, oh yes, alone, right?
I do know pain very well. No. There's an old saying that actually you will more likely awaken to the truth if you have a ton of suffering than if you have a comfortable life. Yeah. Because the suffering can drive you to the edge so much that either you jump into the ocean and you swim, which means you awaken, or you actually drown and your life ends. Yeah. So for me, there was no more choice point. It was like, well, the choice point was like, I either wake up and swim and find the truth, or I die. And what led up to it was like a long story of constant childhood abuse and such severe trauma that I don't think anybody wants to hear this.
Whatever. Yeah.
But just to say that I was ready at that point, and you know, I would say I have tremendous life energy and love for life, but at this point, after that childhood, I felt like I want to take my life and end it right there. So it was literally like, okay, now I wasn't into drugs or anything, but I was definitely, you know, sitting there like, this is too much suffering, I can't handle it. And I did not have anybody who could help me. You know, at that time it was like, get over it, you know, move on. Well, so what? We don't talk about abuse. Nobody should know about it anyway. So, but that piece was like so strong that I had to find, you know, I had to find something more that I could connect with that would lift me through or get me through the suffering. So the second time when I had my turning point, I felt like it was getting through my conditioning. And first, you know, after I lived with Mother Theresa and worked with her, and then also with the Tibetans, where we were intensely trained on Well, I'm not sure if anybody would do this when they're 18. I don't know what craziness hit me when I sit in the mountains in the Himalayas, and every morning we had to get up in the freezing cold at 4 a.m. and drink this horrible yuck milk. And at night we had to sleep literally on barren floor, and it was freezing cold, and every day for 11 hours meditate on death. You do this for 2 weeks. I mean, sometimes you think like anybody who's older would meditate on death. No, I was going for the whole 9 yards. I'm like, give it to me. I'm going to that very all the way through. My mantra was only awake me all the way through. I will not stop at anything, because you see, I had already enough suffering in the past that more didn't really scare me, because it's kind of like if you beat a dog, he's not afraid anymore at some point. It's a sad story, but there was my hunger for the truth and to live that, and for the love to really find and totally root in that, was way stronger than my fear of encountering uncomfortable things with people around me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the contrast, right? I mean, you're already dealing with that fear and that repressed, emotional experience of suffering that, for some people who live a more comfortable life. I grew up in a pretty comfortable life. Doing all that travel alone, in the 80s to India, to Tibet, that seems like a lot of suffering. It sounds like a very difficult thing, but from your perspective, it was quite the opposite. It was quite freeing.
It was incredible. For me, incredible. And work in the slums in Calcutta, I saw people who were suffering in Calcutta, and yet they had that spark in their eyes. They had something that I felt the people in the West had partially lost. It's that, you have seen it, Corinne, right? It's like there's this spark in the eye, and even though by people who live on the street and have nothing. And I could feel that I wasn't just motivated to wake up or get away from my suffering or to heal that, but I was motivated. I wanted to find love and live it. That was my main driving force, because I could see not only did I need the truth of love, but I could see in the whole world we were doing things that are completely crazy, polluting the planet and racism and all that. I was seeing all these things already since I was 14 when that happened. I thought, I have to find an answer and be the answer in this world. That's where, for me, it was like, I will be the great turning. I will embody this. And I wanted to nothing more than just learn from the greatest masters that are embodying that in a real way. So after go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about, actually, the way we came up with the podcast is during quarantine, I started writing a spiritual memoir of my turning stories. And every time I would describe it, I would say, oh, I had this turning point and this turning point. And a friend of mine said, well, your book is called Turning Points. And then I started to ask people, when was your spiritual turning point? And it seemed like many of the people that I knew, spiritual seekers, had these turning points, and I loved hearing about it. And so I asked Sean, because he was in town, and we talked until 4 a.m, and he was talking about his spiritual turning point, and it just hit me like a light bulb. We need to do a podcast and have these conversations. And so, I feel like there's some people that have this awakening when they're young, or this experience and when they're young. And to me, it's almost like coming in the back door. I too had some similar things when I was young, and there was such innocence in the experience. There was no words for it really. And then there's the knowledge piece. There's some of the Advaita Vedanta people that come to it from the intellect, and they understand it intellectually, and you can very clearly feel that they don't experience it yet, some of them, but they can talk about it. And then there's this, there's this merging that you can feel what happens. So can you talk about maybe that merging for you, because that's where we left off now, is you looking to study with these spiritual masters, and I'm assuming it was for more understanding. And
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like, in some ways, I was glad I hadn't read books about what was happening. Later, I look back and I could categorize those experiences, and I had many of them, as mystical experiences that any mystic goes through. And so I would feel, for me, it was always important to first experience something and then find out, okay, what's real? Is this true? And find also the knowledge for it. But the most important was for me that people, what I was drawn to was my masters who actually embodied it on this earth, in this body, in the muck, no matter where they are. And that's what inspired me the most. And for me, it was like, I mean, I could feel how this, coming home back to Germany and going to study social work at that time and psychology, I was like, I have to deal with this human conditioned being here that was in stark contrast to the expanded divinity that emerged through those experiences. I mean, it's kind of like, you sit in the Himalayas and there's this complete immersion in, after all falls away, after nothing is left, we meditated on death until we almost, nothing was there anymore. I fell into this realization, not mentally just, but on all levels, which is like, it was blown all, and it wasn't an understanding, it was a knowing that emerged. I am that. And I could only talk with the lamas about it, but it was also Mother Teresa had another language. It's like, you are that, God is that love in you. Yeah, so everyone has a different way. But for me, it was so different between hearing the words and actual experience. And that was, not through a drug or anything. It made such a lasting shift in me. I could never go back to the old life and the old way. But it didn't say, when I returned, it didn't mean like I was done with my human existence of my own conditions, my own hang-ups, my patterns. They were still there, and they were well and intact.
Yeah, cheers to that one.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what's extremely important about the integration process of, you said in kind of one of your earlier stories about coming home to what's real and experiencing, the dawn of your own being, the dawn of God in your own being. And I think people love to hear that part of it, right? Because that's the moment of, massive opening. And if it was, I don't want to say if it was that simple. I mean, that's what you experience and that's what you carry within you. But then that integration process of being in this very small vessel for awareness as you interact in society. And that's, we've been talking a lot more. I didn't even know anything about the non-dual teachings and, probably until this year, really. And that's what seems to be at the core value of non-dual living is you experience that expansive awareness and you bring that with you, and you bring that experience of coming home to reality with you in all aspects. It's not something that can ever be missing from your life.
Yeah, I think that's true. When you say non-dual, I felt like sometimes even the non-dual field doesn't really allow for one piece that I felt that I experienced over and over again. It's like non-dual talks about awareness, but without love, it's not whole.
Yeah.
And for me, I realized, it needs to be both those wings. It's the presence and the love. Because we're too dry with the awareness alone. It becomes like this seeing. But with the love, it becomes this.
Sharing, yeah.
It's both the horizontal and the vertical, but I don't want to get too much into.
No, I think that's an important point because I think a lot of our listeners and friends are sort of starting to dabble into this just because we are and we interest in that, and I certainly have been hanging out in Tiruvannamala for many years, and have seen that that dry awareness that you're talking about. Yet also my experience is when I truly felt presence, it is love. I mean, that when it's out of, when I that which is looking through my eyes is unconditionally fulfilled, and love, and everywhere all the time, and never not, it exists always. That, to me, that quality is there always. And yet, but I think it is missed because, and I don't know for sure, but that's sort of what my small perspective is that when I see people, they stop at a certain point. Like I said, they have that intellectual understanding, but they don't really truly embody, feel. They're still very overshadowed by the I, the thoughts, the feelings and emotions, and so they're not able to really taste that. Do you want to talk about that? I'd love to hear more about your feeling for that.
Yeah, I'm already like listening to you, and I love that you're bringing that up because it's a fine point, and yet it's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
And I see not only that there's an intellectual understanding, but there is an awareness that is just seeing things as they are. Okay, so that's one step. But the love, it has to crack your heart open. You have to involve your heart. And therefore, when that cracks open, it is capable, like all the great beings, to embrace it all into the great heart of this universe. And that's what I felt. That piece is essential. And without that, you have awareness, which is good, very important, but without letting the heart break open, you have baked. And then
letting the heart out of the rib cage.
Yeah.
The cage of the ribs.
And there's stuff that's going to happen, and then what you both just also mentioned, the integration of coming home, not just like as a realized as a being, but also really inhabiting this body, really coming to terms with, really getting into the emotional body of letting it, actually freeing it up, liberating it. The somatic, the mental, this is everything, that everything can come home. Everything. Not one thing, no one and nothing is left out. And that means also it's not just to heal things, it's also to let it's already held in this love, but to let the shame just, here is a friendly place for you, shame. Here is a friendly place for that part that is always feeling separate from everybody. That's, or the hole inside of us that's craving, fill me. Even that can be, as it is natural movement, it's touched by awareness and breath, but also tremendous love, because nothing will open up. No one will actually land really home unless they're touched by love and presence. It's like the rose that just stays tight, and when it is touched in a certain way, it starts opening, So I felt like suddenly at some point I wasn't at war anymore with my humanity. I wasn't using the word ego anymore because it felt so divisive, like saying, oh, I have to overcome my ego. It's a language that is so old-fashioned patriarchal that just creates more separation instead of a compassionate culture,
That's a great point about, because that was a mission for me for a long time. I'm sure Corinne and I've had plenty of conversations about, not destroying the ego, but resisting it, or, it at the time, now I can recognize it as such, but at the time it did feel like a disconnecting. It felt like I was stretching something off of me, something that didn't aid in that love. I wasn't loving those parts of it, and then it just became such a weapon, against the ego, and then the ego would use that against me, and it was just this internal, battleground. And so you saying that really, kind of triggered something in a feeling in me, is that it was that battleground. I was fighting things, and you mentioned shame. That's something we don't, even in there is a lot of shame that still kind of hangs around throughout this process. And so that's a great point. I'm going to sit with that one for a little bit. I have a bunch to say about it, but I want to sit with it first. But that's a beautiful point.
I thank you for, making that even more clear, because for me, it's like I see a lot of people struggling with this and going actually to war with their own humanity, or going to war with their own wounds or beliefs. Like, you have to get rid of it, you have to overcome it, you have to heal it, you have to fix it. And it's like this, this is an ongoing rat race, because as soon as you fix one thing, the next thing is falling apart.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you have this belief of worthlessness, and then that belief, and then you try to get rid of the beliefs. And sometimes I think what's missed in all that is that, no, we're not our beliefs, of course. It's important to disidentify from that. But there's also a place where it's like all is already welcomed, and it can be there. It's like you're so much more than your worth or your no worth. Inherently, there is a truth. And to recognize that you are worthy as you are, always have been, no matter what the heck you do or not do. And to rest back, to drop back into the truth. And then that what is worthless can be embraced. What feels worthless can be embraced. And it can be there, sit on the same table with, Mr. Fear and Mrs. Pain. Welcome to the party.
For sure.
I love the hearing about this. I'm glad I revisited your website before we started, because I remember this is what drew me to reach out to you, to meet you and have you on the podcast. Was you did mention the feminine side of the teaching, of the non-dual teaching. And it's something that I talk about. My roommate is very much into it, and we hang out at a retreat center. Actually, I was in a silent retreat all weekend. I just got back last night, and with a beautiful, wonderful feminine teacher. Very much a lot of her words remind me of you. Her name is Alea. And we interviewed her in February, and we my community of people, we've been talking so much about this need for the feminine teaching of this. There's so many male teachers out there, and there's some wonderful things that they're saying. Adyashanti, of course, we love him. Rupert Spira is amazing, and Eckhart. They're saying some wonderful things, but there is that, even with Adya, as wonderful as he is, there is that feminine, and he knows it, because actually Alea is his student, and he asked her to start teaching because she's a householder. She has a couple of kids, and she embodies this love beautifully, and it's so needed. So I'm so happy to hear you speaking about this, and to hear more of this perspective from you, this welcoming of bringing everybody to the party.
Yeah, it's beautiful when you mentioned about the feminine, because I feel like at some point there was another turning in my life where I felt, all the male masters that I spent time with the Dalai Lama, the Thich Nhat Hanh, and Sai Baba, and all of them absolutely fantastic. But the more I was steeped in that realization, it showed me actually the way was down to descend. And that there was not just to fix things down there, it was actually to descend into the deep, dark feminine. And that happened for me in a very special cave where I spent, a long time in silence in the dark. And that's when first there it happened for me, that there was this turning towards, oh my goodness, this is the way of the feminine. It's going into the deep dark, and there is an enormous power and creation that is waiting to unleash and especially come forth in the women, that the male teachers cannot. They're great and it's important, but for 2,000 years it was the male teachers, white and male, and us as feminine, as the women, were always treated as secondary teachers. And in that moment, I saw the patriarchy was so imposed onto the real, in the spirituality, that it was like a half thing whole missing. And it was doing this thing for where I saw people. It was like, oh my God, they're more split off after 20 years of meditation than before. Because it was driving people up and out into the transcendence and not into the immanence, where in every leaf, in every dog is the divine, and is a whole other way where form is the divine, rather than you have to go beyond form. So for me, this was actually one of my biggest major turning, was when I tapped into the feminine, and a lot of my teachings now come directly from that source, directly from that root. And I feel very, very dedicated to it, because it's missing in our world so much. It's just coming a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even in the clarity with bringing up that concept of ego, the patriarchy of that, I destroy that, and then I can experience love. That's kind of how the system is, the foundation of the system is built. And when the foundation of the system is built on that system, it would make a lot of sense why you could have somebody meditate for so very long and still be disconnected from that experience of embodying and welcoming and, surrounding everything with that love. There's so many subtle elements of that same kind of construct in this process of unfolding, that it's very important to look at it from a different lens. And that's what the feminine lens is. It's a patient and compassionate, and it's inclusive.
And sometimes very fierce.
Yes, Kali.
Heard that, man.
Cut the sword and cut through the BS, it's like, and one of the BS is that transcendence is the only way. No, it's inclusive, transcendence part of it, but it's also vertical, horizontal. It's like and it includes how the earth is doing, how we treat the animals, how we treat each other.
Yeah.
That it's not, and how we, take care of each other, and maybe stretch out a hand to somebody who is suffering to help, and that the well-being of all beings is the well-being of us. So there's no difference. And you can have that in your head, but when I fell into that, it was a direct felt experience of, oh my goodness, the one pain in Africa is the pain in my heart. The joy of a newborn baby is smiling in me. It's the same, it's like suddenly there's no more the difference in that way, with different forms, of course. But there is suddenly a reverence towards all life. And that's what I feel is the feminine very strongly. And I feel we need that. And it's so hard for people to care when they don't experience connection.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing that I tell people that all the time. It's, if if you felt connected, if countries, you know, political parties felt connected, they wouldn't, or countries, the people leading the countries, if they felt connected to what they were harmed, they wouldn't do, you know, they're missing connection. So I guess it's different for everybody. Do you teach in satsang, or do you teach privately, or?
Yeah, I teach in satsang, and I hold, you know, since 30 years retreats, spiritual retreats.
Yeah.
And I have groups, spiritual groups. And of course, I combine, you know, embodied spirituality and also psychology. So then we, you know, we weave it. So, you know, because when you, for example, a person gets a Kundalini awakening, like the Shakti moves through, well, it can burn you up, really, emotionally, mentally. You can go cuckoo. But I've seen it.
Yeah.
It's like, hello, come back.
Grounding needed.
Well, and it's not easy when so much power moves through you. So then your vessel needs to be really like a good tuned flute of Krishna, you know. You need to be prepared for it, and that can move through you, and then the transmission to bless all beings, you know. It's that you become an answer to all prayers. Yeah. But that, so I feel like it needs both. And for me, that's the bridge how I, you know, teach, and I train also people to work with others, because I feel it needs more people like you know, go out and take the torch out.
Absolutely.
And do it for the Westerners, so we don't need to always travel to India, and know how to guide others in a way that's integer.
And takes them to the truth. That's what I've noticed. And, you know, why I'm so drawn to you and Alea, these beautiful, beautiful teachers who fully embody and can articulate this. You know, I'm a yoga teacher, meditation teacher many years, meditator many years, and, you know, life coaching and everything. But I feel like the regular life coaching is like pulling the Titanic. It's like, I just can't do it anymore. So I'm sort of in the middle of, what I've been doing recently is just sort of bringing my people and then sending them to like Alea or to you, or just to take them to the next piece. Cause I'm still marinating. And I don't know if I'll ever be ready to speak, you know, in that way. I just do what I do. I'm really good at bringing people into their bodies. You know, I teach what's called awareness yoga. And so I just keep doing, you know, what I'm doing. Yeah. And I feel like, you know, part of the masculine, the theory that I have is like, the reason why maybe there has been so many male teachers is that masculine is like, you know, it has pushed its way to the top. It's bullied its way and pushed its way to the top. The feminine is a much more subtle and yet so powerful. As you said, it's this, you went into the darkness, and that Shakti, that base of that Shakti, I think does have the potential to also push its way. And I guess we just are here to support that, in that energy. Because if I start to get the me in there, I need to do this. It's like, no, I don't need to do anything. There is no, I just need, it's like hard even to have language around it. But that's where I get stuck a little bit, because I've been a doer my whole life. I can make things happen, but I've been the last 4 or 5 years definitely meditating, and I'm here of service, but I'm here of service when people show up to ask. I don't want to push anymore.
That's the way. That's the way. And everybody has their own way of bringing forth the, you know, I call it the nectar of life. Yeah. Or guiding people home. It doesn't mean that somebody has to teach and sit on a stool in front of others. It means, like, you know, some go and they work with the body. It doesn't matter even if you raise children, you know, or you clean toilets. There was one training I had once, and it was shortly after I came back from India, after I went to Findor and I lived there. And it was like, if you can if you can clean the toilets and the bathrooms with love and present, you're going to move on to the next level. It was that training that was, oh, here you ground, here you bring it into your day-to-day life, into your interactions with people, so that it's not just an amazing realization or a deep steeping in the truth, but it's also learning, okay, in the way, how do I touch you? How do I relate with you? How do I tend to all beings? That's that piece is usually, the embodiment is usually really hard for people, because it's, and that's the feminine, I would say. She's about like, okay, let's take that torch and we carry it in the world. We resurrect this, what was forgotten, connect with it, and let it, instead of doing, you do from it. You let that flame move you into an action, into your yoga class, and the way you teach. It's like letting it speak. Like when I'm sitting with you, my focus is on letting her speak, so that, and my vessel is in service to that.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's been growing over the last year or so in my experience, and as of late it feels, I think the last month or so, it's been just this, nothing else seems as important as surrendering to the mission of the Most High, surrendering to not what I want, not because I can intellectualize the crap out of anything and figure out why this might be, the rationalization is unreal, and that I think is one of my maybe one of my biggest hangups, is that when it comes time to move from that source, then I want to take up the mantle, and do from that space of I know what to do, instead of what you're talking about, which is, do from the flame, move from that motivation, that gravity. I like that you use a flame for that motif. I use this gravity. There's this pull to come out and be in that space purely from that divine moving you, and that's a tricky experience, because there's a lot of ways we can get in our own ways. It's and that's why I like that you bring kind of some of the psychological aspects to your teaching, because there's these roadblocks in our psyches that, it's the beliefs, but it's the traumas, it's the emotions, all of those things create these shunts in our experience, and you got to be able to kind of work through all of them, and people aren't always aware of how to move through those things. So
no, I appreciate that you have that awareness. That's beautiful, because this is where we can trip ourselves so much that we even think, well, like the Spaniards, for example, when they invaded way, way back, in the name of God, we killed them. Or, the Catholic Church, in the name of God, we kill all the Cathars. I mean, it was just like, what we thought is God's will is often our, human stuff that we haven't dealt with.
Yeah.
It takes, as you said, takes the mantle. Now I'm going to put the mantle on my hatred and say, this is God's will, I'm going to kill you.
Yes.
So this is where you said rightly, we need awareness. There has to become an awareness, but also a deep dedication to the truth. This is like when you surrender and give myself to the truth, and the truth shall show my way. Or I have always said, to the love itself, and let it love in its own way. I am a servant of that. And I think that word service is not very popular in the West. No. But we are but the funny thing is, we're constantly in service to something. I mean, even in this moment, what am I serving right now? know? And most people if we just stop sometimes and ask, what am I serving? Whom am I serving right now? Oh, and maybe I'm serving my mind trip, or I try to cover up my wounding, or then it becomes like an inquiry, but it's an inquiry that doesn't judge. It's, oh, here we are. Well, how about we shift towards serving, thy will be done as and through me.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have a pre-made book, unfortunately. Most people don't have pre-made, because like when you said going with the coaching, it's like the 1, 2, 3 keys. And the annoying part is that this isn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
You sit there like, okay, then ask yourself, how does this love or this truth or this glimmer, this flame want to speak right now? I surrender and let it. And then there's a moment where it's just like, oh yeah, there it is. Now follow that, Yes.
No, I was going to say, I must say, I have never taught, like, even though I did to Tony Robbins certification, I've never coached from like a system. I've always I'm clairaudio, I can hear things. And so I very much tune in. For me, I've done so many things in 30 years that I feel like I can cut the fat a little bit for people when they come to me. Then I'm like, well, you might want to try this book and try this kind of meditation, and let's deal with, what your belief system is here. So it's sort of like that. It's very, very different from everybody.
I believe that you do it that way because I can sense who you are.
Yeah. I feel it still feels like the Titanic, though, sometimes, I must say.
It will continue, honey. Learn to swim in the storm.
Yes.
It's as often this wishful, like, oh yeah, it will end. No, the waves are going to get bigger, love. But I'm not going to tell anybody that before.
Yeah.
Because like when you speak about the turning points, it's like the great turning. We are part of this amazing experience of like, well, are we going to turn the Titanic or are we not? And this great turning, the invitation for all of us to wake up and contribute, do our part to help us to shift our, wake up from the delusion and then take action that are much more aligned and, in reference to all of life. I think. And there is, in my experience, there's this sense of like, oh, this is like the waves are going to happen, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. They're just going to get stronger and stronger. It's like you learn to swim in a little swimming pool, and then, life says, okay, go out. And then one day a ship picks you up and throws you right in the middle of the ocean and says, okay, go for it. And the storm and the hurricane is happening. That's called like, can you abide in the truth or in the love, even when all this stuff is going on and and not closing off to any experience, but rather leaning right into the wave and letting it move through you. That's for me more mastery, and when you say, the embodiment takes a while, and there is good to have some kindness with ourselves. It's not an overnight job.
I like that you used abiding, because that word actually just came up to me this last week. I heard it in a Rupert Spira podcast where he was talking about, we self-reflect for so long and we get caught up in the self-reflection, and his word, because I believe there's 2 different translations, and I don't know anything about Sanskrit and the translations, all that, but he was mentioning that self-abiding is essentially that next level after self-reflection, where you experience and you walk, you self-abide, do the will of, the higher self, the true self awareness. You're abiding in that instead of reflecting, because that reflection process can become a bit a bit intellectual. Yes, an occupation.
Indeed.
Yes, absolutely an occupation.
It's like, okay, let's get over this.
That's a great. That's exactly the word. It becomes this thing that we always have to do. Well, I got to self-reflect, and five years later, you're still self-reflecting. But are you abiding in the lessons of what that reflection has brought to you? Are you swimming in the deepest ocean that you're capable of swimming in, and enjoying it and loving it and carrying with you?
Yes, and it will go always deeper and deeper. But there's this turning point. If I come back to the theme of your podcast, this turning point when a human being says, yes, I want it all the way. I'm going to just, like you said, I'm just surrendering to the truth, and this shall be my home. Camp out there, bring my camping gear there, then I put my tent up, and then I start building a house, and then you just built the camp, and then everyone else can come and just in your presence is touched by that. But you're not willing at some point to keep leaving the love. You leave, and your prayer of surrender, you come back, and more you come back, and at some point it's more and more of an abiding and letting it live you, and that's just like, yeah. And the pieces that I found so exciting was like, because I was sitting there like, what the heck am I going to do with all my traumas? I can go into therapy for 50 years and I'm still at the beginning. So of course I went into therapy, of course, and it was extremely helpful. But I also realized that every piece, and that's what made it exciting, that every piece that I was meeting on the road that pulled me away from, let's say, home base, was a way to actually find another, missing piece. It's like working through a piece of trauma suddenly catapulted me into greater compassion for other beings. Or working through, some warped thing in the head, it catapulted me into crystal clarity. Yeah, so it's like the beauty of all our stuff is actually within that there is the divine right there, and therefore you can embody it much more
and really embody it, and then have compassion and feel it in others, and feel that interconnectedness. Your story is my story is your story.
And not being afraid of the pain anymore, not being afraid of the enormity of joy, but also not being afraid of all the pain that's, the blood that's running through the streets and in people's hearts.
Yeah,
I think as soon as we're not so busy with trying to protect ourselves from the dual nature of this world, pain and joy, from the pain, in that moment there's a freedom, not a freedom from, but being free in the midst of it all. That the love isn't destroyed through that. And I can feel all that because it's just moving through me, and there is actually a capacity that developed in me where just like I can sense you, and there's no fear of, oh, maybe you touch something in me. It's more like, no, it's just an openness.
Sorry. Oh, that's so beautiful. So beautiful.
It's a very different these turning points. It was very different than what I read in books or teachers.
Right.
I think that's where I sometimes had difficulty, where it's like, what is going on? I just like, and then afterwards I find out, oh my goodness, the words started like, okay, that's the embodied spirituality, that's the feminine, and we need that now. So I don't know, there were many turning points.
Yeah, and that's I think our whole life, and it continues. It's infinite, right?
Yeah. But it was, I was, at some point I was asked to teach by several teachers, and I didn't want to teach because I was like, well, I'm not cooked, and I didn't, but it kept, the pressure was on. And I realized much of what I walked through was in order to be not just for my own, but it was also because I had to know the territory really well in order to guide people.
Mm-hmm.
There is a difference between a teacher who's like flies up the helicopter and sees the territory and makes a nice map, and you cross through the river, but that person is not, and sells the maps for good money maybe, and but there's a difference between actually going through that river and realizing, oh, well, actually there's crocodiles, so honey, that's not a good idea, and this is how you build a raft to get across. You see, there is a difference between somebody who's walked through it than somebody who's just realized. And I think at this point we need that someone has touched all the places so they can walk. You take your hand and say, yeah, I know but there's the dragon, and you just give him some, give him some apples, he likes that, and we'll move on. Don't get stuck with the dragon, because otherwise you're going to be French fries. It's like, I'm speaking metaphorically, but
yeah.
So you need a guide. The guide has walked the whole 9 yards of hell and in heaven, so that you can guide you. But just to buy a map from somebody who thinks they have the ultimate, I would say that's a dangerous thing, because they may have just not wanting to get their fingers and feet dirty.
And that I think, and I'm dealing with this issue right now, is I think I just don't like gurus, and especially male gurus. And there's so many people that are into this one guru right now. And every time I hear his name, my skin crawls.
I probably know what you mean.
I'm sure you know who I mean. And so many, and really, lovely people are really into him and listening to him. And I'm like, oh, and so I still feel like, and we actually interviewed somebody who I was really enjoying the conversation until she said she had an awakening with him. And then I was like, and then I had all kinds of stuff come up during, and she didn't really realize that Sean knew exactly what was going on, because he knows me so well. And I emailed her later and I said, I'm sorry, I do have this judgment against this teacher. And I know I shouldn't. And I know it's something
you should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, there's I feel like there's a difference between using discrimination, clarity, and wisdom, and judging somebody. Judging somebody is just putting the person down. But if you see something with, especially with teachers and especially with gurus, I think it's very, very wise to look 100 times under the carpet, and to trust your gut on certain. It doesn't mean you should embrace. It doesn't mean that at all. You can actually say, yeah, I see our oneness, and you're a jerk, behaving like a jerk. Certain teachers, like the male gurus, there's a lot of sexual abuse going on and all that.
Power
misuse, and many of the disciples are sweet young women who are looking badly for a father they never had also. And some of them have immense realizations, but when you look, there's always one thing I think is so good, when you look behind somebody's curtain and appearance and see how do they actually behave. And is the student having just a realization, or do they actually get more into their own authority and power?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of questions to ask. I think it's very wise for you to sometimes, allow that.
Yeah, it goes a little deeper with me. I know that I quantify and qualify things a little bit with teachers, and that's, even the teacher I was with that last weekend, there was a little bit of dialogue in myself after the weekend. And it didn't stick to me very much, because as soon as the dialogue came of, whatever how I was in it, because usually I don't rethink much anymore in my life, but I when the dialogue would come, I just would remember she always has this thing where she's like, just open your hand. When you're thinking too much, it's like this. And when you go into, this is the beloved, you're the beloved, and you just feel this opening. So I know that it's still something within me, like discrimination and discernment. For sure, I think those are key. We live in this world, right?
Yep.
But there's still a little button in me that's above, my prayer every day is the aham brahmasmi, above and beneath no one. That's something. And so I feel like there's still a little stickiness there that's happening, that I can feel, that's,
And it's beautiful, Kuna, that you are feeling that. What a beauty that you can sense into that there is a place where there is still the stickiness and a piece for you that's calling for you.
Yeah. Yes.
Beautiful.
And I think what's most interesting is the biggest, if I may speak to your experience, Corinne, the biggest thing that triggers you is that kind of what we touched on, the sensitivity to a lack of responsibility, like you mentioned, where you bridge with the psychology and the experience of knowing that when you're in this space and you're teaching somebody in that space, or there's teaching in that space, and somebody has a breakthrough or whatever, you have the tools and the experience to know how to guide that person back out of the wilderness of their experience. And I think, Corinne, the biggest hang-up, that if we call it a hang-up, is when you see that happening, because you've had experiences with that, and it's more of recognizing that that person as a teacher is not fully engaged in the responsibility of that role, and doing the roadmap thing and putting people, say, oh, go into the wilderness, that's where you're going to discover yourself, but not having the ability to walk with them, or at least the humbleness as a teacher to walk into that wilderness with that person. And so it is not a judgment. It's not this is a piece of shit, I don't like him at all. It's having experience and saying, man, that's not the right way. And then watching, like you said, vulnerable young women being taken advantage of that situation.
Yep.
It sucks.
And yet, Nicola, what do you, thank you, Sean. That's you definitely spoke.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. And because the other part of me is like, okay, and I don't get too caught up in this anymore, but it is, I do know it's part of their journey too. Like, my suffering has been my awakening, my sort of,
Yeah. But there's something that, sure. And there's unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there is harm done, I would say, speak up.
Yeah.
Not the right way.
And that's what drew me, of course, to you and Jack, the organization that you founded. And tell me the name again. I always forget the name. The Spiritual Integrity. The
Association of Integrity for Spiritual Teachers. Terrible long name.
Yeah.
Like, my God. Yeah, and I think also Corinne is, go ahead. You were saying.
No. Go ahead. I was done.
Yeah, this level, the be a teacher there is quite a level of responsibility and integrity, and also to recognize no teacher is perfect. If any teacher delivers, oh, I'm already beyond everybody, you know what, run for your life.
Yeah.
Because they have a pile of garbage in their storage locked up, and it's going to come out on you.
Yeah.
So the discrimination, yes. And there is something also like, opening what's touched in you. Maybe this is the other part. It's often we come with a mixed bag. Is this not really allowing fully the love to take you? Like, it's a surrender piece that's often, there's something touched in a transmission from a teacher that, is gonna hit the resistance inside of us. It must. Mm-hmm. And then we just push them nicely a little bit away by saying, it wasn't perfect. Wasn't quite right. Yeah. So that's sometimes where things get touched inside that we really don't consciously we want to have a touch, but unconsciously, hell no, you're not gonna touch.
Yeah, and I'm sure. I mean, I'm hearing it from my own self right now, because I feel that's maybe what's happened to me. I've had huge heart opening experiences, but I still feel like that's actually the piece for me that's where I'm marinating still, because I feel like I have had experiences where I have been totally wide open. But I'm not there all the time. And I don't know if we're supposed to be there all the time. I mean, it's the yeah.
It's like when we look at nature, it contracts and expands.
Yeah.
So, and it's always this saying, all the time there. And it's like, well, as if it's static. It's like, it's like there's something, but, I just would get curious about, what is touched in there that I need to pull the curtain here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
just was a like I said, was a clear but also kind inquiry. How does it feel in my heart? That piece that likes to close up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And
I see.
so to start having a relationship with that what closes. We don't need to always stand like this, but there's a part that's let me touch my fear here. Its invitation is really to touch everything home, everything. And that is such a beauty and so sometimes so challenging. And I think you are so deeply already on the path, Corinne. It's like these little pieces that seem so little, and they seem so deep. They are because they're at the core of where the knot of separation sits and just like holds the whole construct in place.
Yes.
You're like, we move already. I want to just be in love all the time. You're like, I can't unravel this knot. And you start to bug around. And so this one, sometimes you just need a guide, somebody from the outside. It's like, okay, let's just, tend to this a little bit. And then something begins to move in a way least expected. But I really appreciate that you brought this up about the teachers, and because I think it's a theme that is so, so crucial. Because spiritual teacher there's no professional credibility. You don't have like anybody, any doodle can call themselves.
It's true.
A lot of them do, and it can give a lot of ego gratification. And now I said the word ego, but it can just blow you up to grand proportions. I've seen it. I'm like, okay, you sat for 2 years on your meditation cushion and you just have the knack of drawing people to you like magnets, and you throw them into the most intense experiences. And then they come out and they're completely disseminated, can't function as a human being, and their trauma is worse. But you don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's where this is very important for people to check their teacher.
Yeah.
And also that the teacher empowers you rather than says, I have the truth and you poor thing, kiss my feet.
Yeah. Yeah, because the thing is I tell people this all the time, and I'm very clear in my life. You can get the truth and the teaching with a brick over your head, or you can get it with a touch of a feather. I mean, there's all different ways that we wake up, but sometimes people need the brick. Apparently, because it's what happens, right? I mean, I know you're talking about something different there with the teacher.
Yeah.
Because that seems to get very messy.
Yeah. Well, I was talking more about, more whole person as a teacher, and humble enough, and also aware of their own responsibility in that role, knowing how it can be abused power, because people lay their hearts bare.
Yeah, they do.
You have to be very careful and also knowing. But what you just said about the brick, I'm not so sure if you can awaken with the feather. I would say, we're so dense as human beings. We need many bricks and it's like, okay, turn on the fire. Well, I can't quite feel it. Well, let's turn it up, baby. Let's just be honest. Look at the planet. We need.
It's the big bricks.
Yeah.
We would have long time could have recognized that we're creating climate change. Well, when I was 14, I was like speaking at my school about all that, and people thought I'm mad. And now, it's like I'm looking, well, now comes the hurricanes. Well, we're still asleep. Let's see. Oh, yeah, the fires are coming more and more, but we're still asleep. So I think as a collective, because the awakening is not just personal, it's collective. It's a very slow moving animal. And at some point, it just needs a little bit more fire under the butt.
Yeah.
That's the way. And because our conditioning is not just your personal conditioning, you have your family line with you, your ancestors. It's like you waking through you. Everybody is getting a taste of that. Get some of this awakening. So I would say our own conditioning is sometimes so thick. Feather touch is lovely. I think it's beautiful. It's very, very beautiful and helpful. But you need both.
Yeah.
You need both.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a lot of it in our collective human experience here on this earth, and I think you mentioned the fierceness of the divine energy, feminine energy, and I think we're getting some of that from Mother Earth here, and it's been tumultuous. So I think it's great to have, it's great knowing that there's people like you on the other side of the pond, that have this integrity and are part of the association that also is keeping the integrity within the teaching community as well. I think that's huge, and that will expand and grow and be a beautiful resource, I think.
Yeah. And I think also even teachers are coming more and more, like some of us were meeting together, and I feel very dedicated to the great turning on this planet. So it's more than just the awakening, it's the embodiment, and that we help to turn this. And I think this is also new in the spiritual teaching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree that the conversation has been missing, and I'm so happy. So however, Sean and I can support that. We're here. We certainly post everything, and we'll post the link to the Spiritual Integrity Organization, so that people can look into that. And in any other way, I'm so happy to be in touch with you now and with Jack, and just feel so blessed to have had you here today. Just really.
It's such an honor. It's such an honor. I feel like we kissed so many things in this conversation, and I really hope that anybody still listening, is actually, in some way or another moved to, go on that journey or deepen their journey, so that it will help so many beings on this planet, including themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful what you're doing. Very beautiful. Thank you for having me there.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for joining us. This has been amazing. I've been blessed with a lot of powerful and incredible women in my spiritual walk. So thank you for being another one in this conversation.
Honored.
Until next time.
Yes. Thank you.
And we are in the Say More section with Nicola Amadora. So she's the third contact that we've had from the Association of Spiritual Integrity. Jack O'Keefe was the first, and then Zachary Adama, and then now Nicola. Man, they have created a serious and powerful bar for, I think, what the association, is based on, formed on, and just the integrity that's the perfect word for it, because you can tell that there is experience, there is wisdom, there's awareness, and then there's an incredible
Love.
amount of love. Yeah, thank you.
Incredible
that
love.
was the next word I was going for, and that needs to be emphasized, because that was kind of, one of the main points was, after we kind of got through the story of how she got to where she was, talking about non-dual teaching, and which is something that's big on our conversation lately, and her saying, yes, awareness, it's wonderful, but it can be intellectualized too much to the degree that you're not inviting love and, that compassion element into it. And you can tell that she does, and the other two teachers definitely do as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really fun to get to know her. And especially, I just came off a silent retreat this past weekend. Like, today is Monday, and, Sunday I got back from the Wellbeing Center with Alea, my second retreat with her. And of course had some openings, and there's still subtle bubbly things happening. And so I kind of put my own little personal things in there. And she was so, of course, intuitive and open, and saw some things in me right away. And she said after the after talk, sometimes I swear we should record the after talk sometimes, because it's like, once you stop the record button, then things get not a whole lot more casual, but a little more casual. And then we really just talk about, I guess, definitely more personal things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she mentioned, she's like, yeah, I saw that little thing in there and I was going to go for it. And then just decided not to, because I had mentioned I had a judgment about some spiritual teachers. And then she said she had a thought that's like, oh, I wonder if she's going to judge me. And I'm like, right. Oh, no. You're not the kind of teacher I'm judging at all.
No. And that's
not judging. It's what we decided. It wasn't judging. It's a discernment in me that there's some integrity issues that I find with some spiritual teachers. And that's why they created the organization.
Well, and I think if I may speak on where that might be coming from, is you're an incredibly emotionally sensitive and loving, cultivating person. You help people realize their own truth in life, and when you can see something that's so blatantly not going to offer them that space, I think you get very protective of people, and I wouldn't even say that you're very protective specifically of people. You're very protective of anybody that's on the spiritual path, probably in large part because you know how many pitfalls there are, and so that's why I think that word integrity, it's such an important word to operate from. But if dissecting that experience of having a reaction to a teacher like that is lacking in integrity and isn't responsible for what happens to their students as they're having that's a trigger for you. That doesn't do anything for you. You have not been hurt by that person. You're not coming from a space of like, fuck that person because I just hate them. I'm seeing them cause so much harm and so much mistrust in the spiritual community.
And confusion.
Confusion.
To me, it's causing confusion where there doesn't need to be confusion, because the person isn't. And I think that's what we spoke of afterwards.
Yeah.
What Jack had spoke about a little bit, and Nicola talked about a little bit of why they created the association, because there is no bar. Right. For spiritual teachers, there's no organization, and even if doctors and lawyers, do belong to associations that do hold them to a bar, doesn't mean that things don't still happen that don't have integrity, but at least there's somebody to be accountable to that. There's an organization to go to say, hey, this is my experience. And then the organization will say, hey, they'll have a meeting about it. And then they'll say if that person can be a member anymore. So when somebody is a member of this spiritual integrity.org, that they haven't had any complaints about them, and that you can go to. So that's where I'm going now to get a lot of our podcast interviews, because 3 times, it's really, Jack mentioned it took them 2 years, I think she say, to make the mission statement, because they're trying to be so all inclusive and so sensitive to everybody. So so what did you get out of the interview?
Man, excuse me. So what hit me the most, and thankfully you diffused all the attention, so I didn't have to go into it. But she brought up the word shame at one point. You know, she said the triggers of shame, and it wasn't really anything specific. But what I really appreciated was her. I'll get back to that, but the way her story unfolded, and I appreciated that she puts almost more emphasis on the integration and the learning and the wisdom and the knowing of how to cultivate the experience of having an awakening into reality. I think that's probably something that I'm looking at when I hear somebody speak about spirituality. That's a mechanism that I'm really putting a lot of weight into, because we've talked so many times, and I love the mystical stories, and I know you do too, and just that the mystery and the experience of when am I going to awake, and all of that is such a big thing, and I think it overshadows the work that happens afterwards when you have a breakthrough. And I really appreciated that she had that experience, and it was amazing. I expanded. There was a dawn within me as dawn was happening, on Earth, and I think we need to continue having more of those conversations, because you can experience that. We don't know. I don't know exactly by what sense we're experiencing that vastness. It's kind of all the senses. It's a full sensory experience, and then there's walking through life with this finite vessel carrying that experience, and it's not so clear. And like she said, there's not really a book. There's a lot of books that kind of talk about it in these, fragments, and people have had these experiences. Great teachers have had these experiences. And yet it seems like there's not really a instruction manual on how then to be, because we all carry that awareness with us in such a different manifestation that it can be very tumultuous and very scary, sometimes, because you have this opening up, and then this closing off, and then this, expanse, and then you kind of shrink back down. And I appreciate that she went through so much teaching and guiding through all that, to go through her trauma, to cycle back around. And, she didn't need to go into too many details. You had a felt sense that she did a lot of work, and she laughed about it, because she had a comedic experience about something that's like, nobody wants to hear all that. It's there, and it hasn't gone away. And that honesty about the traumas that you've been through, they don't go away. You wear that proudly, and that's where that shame piece came in for me. Is, I don't wear my spirituality proudly. I'm very timid with it when I talk about with non-spiritual seeking people. And that was something that, it hit me really hard. At one point I said, I have more to say about that, but I'm going to tuck that later.
You did. I remember that. But I think if you were ready or wanted to, you would have, because you did stop yourself.
Yeah, because I felt like it was going to go into a coaching session. I wanted,
which would have been fine too, because I kind of went there a little bit. Hey, well, we were interviewing these amazing teachers. Because sometimes it's kind of like when we did that coaching kind of / interview with Lissa. It's like sometimes it's helpful for people to see, the opening aha process, right?
Yeah. Well, which I knew we were going to have that in this section anyway. So I saved it, because I knew there was, if it hit me that strongly that quickly, I knew there was going to be much more to unfold in that. And really it wasn't so much as something I needed to deal with. It was just, it was a click, and it was very clear that that's something I need to work. It was more of a, hey, go check this out, do the Alea thing, and go check that out, later. I'm making fun of myself a little bit there. And watch that and look at that piece and try to figure out where that shame comes from. And, because I'm generally open, I'm not specifically open on everything that I go through, and that's what I appreciated. Well, Jesus, there was so many there's so many core elements to that conversation about, we talk about feminine power and power in vulnerability. That's something that I've been, also hesitant to speak about because, like I keep saying, and I think I brought this up again, as a white male, it's like I understand what that looks like, me talking about feminine topics. But the truth of the matter is I've had so many incredibly grounding experiences with you, with Colleen, and, Alea, with Patty, so many experiences that have reinforced my understanding about how valuable and how powerful that feminine energy is and why that's needed, to the degree that we looked at how our conversation and our system about dealing with ego is. We want to conquer it. That's a patriarchal thing.
Get rid of it.
Or get rid of it. And then we can have love. That's
a condition on our happiness, which happiness is available right here, right now, no matter what.
Correct. And what did I get out of it? That was a huge element to the conversation where I'm recognizing, I guess the whole thing was a call to be more vulnerable and to let go of the shame, because I shouldn't, there's no need for shame. There's nothing I should be ashamed of. And that's what I loved about her particular conversation was she said, wear that with power, wear that with love, wear that with compassion, and wear that vulnerability as a power, because that is what that's ultimately how that's your barometer for, I've experienced it, and then I did the wisdom work, and then I self-reflected, and now I know. I have the gnosis of that, and it's a full circle experience. I love me, I love them, I love everybody, and now you can bring people into that. That's the power of the feminine energy.
Beautiful. That's nice.
And there's this also, that's not instantly gratifying.
Right.
And that's what, she said, yeah, the fierceness of that too.
Yeah.
Because it just puts you in your place with such a, and that's when you look at kind of the metaphor of a mother, Mother Nature, for instance. It's like when you get yelled at your father, you get fear. When you get yelled at by your mother, you have this sense of, it's a disappointment.
Yes, totally.
It's a disappointment.
What a great distinction.
It's a disappointment because you recognize that the mother knows you can live to a better standard.
Yes, what an amazing distinction, Sean.
Right?
That's amazing.
And I'm not disappointing as you as a person. I'm disappointed that you're not living up to your expectations. Yeah. You're not living with integrity. Yeah. That that's the kind of fierceness, and that's the penetrating, look that you get from
Sean.
that. But it's a softness to the anger. There's an acceptance to the anger.
Yeah, and an unconditional love.
Because there's not an ask for you to change. I'm not asking you to change who you are at your core. I'm asking you to rise to that.
Yeah.
Who you are. I'm asking you to rise to your power, and that's the nurturing aspect that and it's. I mean, how long have I been doing this? How long have you been doing that? And that's the first time I recognized how not effective that conversation about ego is. It's like, destroy the ego, get rid of the ego. It's like, that never worked. Of course it didn't work. And I knew that wasn't working through my spiritual reflection, because you can't run from that.
Yeah.
You can't get away from your past, but you can wear your past in a completely different way and bring all the players to the table, is what she said.
Yeah.
I love that, man.
Beautiful. And the way I would speak about it, if I was coaching somebody, I remember years ago I was coaching somebody who was in AA, and I don't know if it was just her interpretation of what they do, but she was like not liking a part of herself. Like, I've got to get rid of that part of myself, the addict or whatever it was at the time, or the person that is dishonest, probably, because a lot of addicts feel that, dishonest. And you know what I would say is, no, embrace that aspect of who you are, because all of our emotions and qualities have positive and negative. So if I'm a controlling person, which most of us can be controlling in one way or another, if I'm out of balance in that controlling part of my nature, that can look like somebody who may be obsessive compulsive, who's gripping on for dear life, like white knuckling through life, you know, and just not really enjoying life very much, trying to control, and we can't control anything. Or if you look at the other aspect of having somewhat of a controlling nature, is you're a very organized person, that you can organize, you know, retreats and office things, and you know, you've got good skills that way. And so it's about embracing, it's about the balance. Always comes back to the Buddha, right in the middle.
Yeah.
It's about the middle path.
Yeah.
It's that acceptance, accepting those parts of our personality and the wave of doingness in the beingness, is finding that balance of it in the middle and not trying to push away anything. And that's what Alea does very much so too.
Yeah.
Since I just got off the Alea retreat, like, even though, you know, Alea and Nicola don't know each other, you know, not studied with the same teachers, but their teaching is very, very similar.
Very in line. Yeah.
Very in line.
I felt that too. It's let's look at that. Let's create a space for whatever that is, and move through that. You know, that's giving each of those items, you know, maybe it's a trauma, maybe it's a belief, maybe it's a programming. It's giving each one of those elements, whatever's coming up, give it that space, knowing you're not attached to that. It's not who you are. Who you are is the expanse. Who you truly are, your true nature, is rooted in that expanse of awareness. But we're still the vessels, you know, and that's what I love about this particular conversation that we've had in this. Yeah, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's still non-dual understanding, but it's inviting that love and that compassion into that conversation, and not just intellectualizing it, because, you know, I wonder sometimes if I'm on that, I understand it intellectually too, you know, constantly looking at that, and you're just kind of, you know, teeter-tottering on, you know, where you're looking at, but bring it back to awareness, and that will tell you where you're at with it.
Yeah. And I mean, we get things where we get them. I remember listening to Deepak years ago, and even reading some of his books, or listening to his, you know, by hanging out with him and listening, some of his lectures would be the same thing almost over and over. His stories would be similar. And I would get it one way one year, and then 3 years later, I'd hear almost the same lecture, the same stories. I've heard it 10 times over the last 3 years, and it's like a light bulb would go up.
Yeah.
Or a good book that you know, it's like we understand. And it's like people that are hearing this, you know, will only understand from the level of where they're coming from. We can only speak from the level where we're coming. You know, it's all, we just do our best to be in the moment, to speak from here. And that was a big part of a Leah retreat too. And that's what was so interesting to hear Nicola talk about it too, is it's all about the heart, all about love. Because Alea there was like 3 or 4 people that had big awakenings on the retreat, and all of it was going from the intellectual down into the heart. There was one fellow who's an engineer, and he'd done all kinds of retreats with a lot of different people, a lot of male teachers, right? And he had some really great experiences, but man, he had a huge awakening, and it was all about finding the home in the heart and opening up his heart. It was amazing. And there was a few other people had very similar.
Yeah, there's something there, man. And that wasn't the first time this conversation wasn't the first time that came up. Very recently, you know, I listened to a couple podcasts where that was emphasized, and I hadn't married those two together, you know, in my understanding yet. And so that's an interesting piece. You know, there's a lot there that I'm looking forward to, you know, letting that unfold in my experience. And it is wild how this wisdom can take so many different forms and go through so many different people and different experiences. And like you said, there was so much in alignment with where Alea was coming from, and where, you know, Nicola was coming from, and even Jack, for that matter, was coming from. And, you know, she was more feisty passion. You know, I loved her, you know, that Irish passion that I think she had when she was, but very much from that space of, no, we need to help. I remember that conversation because there was a question of, you know, is it really something as spiritual teachers that we need to project, that something needs to change, that when she's like, hell yeah, like, you know, she didn't say hell yeah, but, you know, she was
that
very
was her energy.
Her energy was very much like, yes. And that was kind of, you know, where Nicola was coming from with, you know, the conversation about the teacher is like, it's not a judgment when something looks not right, you know, when it's not the right way to be, and it's not coming from a place of love, integrity, and so, you know, that's
and
a unique
connectedness and oneness.
And connectedness, right? So I wonder sometimes if the intellectual, you know, aspect of it, or the intellectual process, uses that as a complacency tool, you know, because it's easy.
Well, the non-dual community certainly does,
because it's like, well, it's all coming from awareness, so why do anything? Kind of.
There's nothing. Well, the misinterpretation is there's nobody here, there's nothing to do it because there's no me inside me.
Right.
But that's what the dryness that she was talking about. That's one.
Yes.
That's, you know, that can happen, and that where people get stuck. And, you know, people get stuck in many different, you know, in many different jobs, and many different ways of thinking, very different belief systems, and it happens in spirituality and non-dualism too. Yeah.
Well, and honestly, a lot of it comes to, you know, when I think about and meditate on, you know, kind of the Buddhist way, you know, meditation and just surrender out of existence, you know, no more into society. I'm out. You know, the amount of wisdom that you can gain from that experience is massive. But then you take the Christ approach, which is, I'm in the slums, I'm loving everybody as they are through all that, and you marry those two ideas, and that's the non-dual aspect. That's the all-encompassing, all-one direct path of, you know, you have access to awareness, and then you be that awareness, and you still have to move through life. It's still, that's the love. That's the compassion of the Christ. You know, it's like, it's so powerful. And that's just one motif, and that's my background coming from, you know, where I'm coming from. But, you know, I love that you can have all these people from so many different backgrounds, and there's so much richness still in the conversation about this topic, right? I mean, how many times we've had a conversation about the non-dual practice? It's like, that was a whole new angle, you know, and it's cool to see that there's still new angles, and there's still more unfolding in that whole process. So,
are you kidding? Between you and I mean, you add another teacher in there, and there's more to talk about. But you and I think we could talk about this stuff all day long.
All day long, and that's what I'm saying is, like, it's still good. What I'm saying is, it's still unfolding. You know,
and that's life. It's never ending. That's what Alea said, and also Nicola alluded to it as well. It's like, it's infinite. This unfolding, this opening, this understanding, this, you know, people, there's this misnomer in spirituality that there's a goal to be reached, that there's a plateau, and there's no plateau, no goals really in anything in life. Life is movement. Life is, you know, if there was a beginning and an end, it's birth and death.
Yeah.
You know, and yet there's something infinite, beingness and consciousness and awareness that's even beyond that.
Yeah. Keep walking.
Keep being. Keep walking. Keep being in the walking.
Keep walking in the being.
Walking in the being.
Well, let's keep the conversations going, but this was a rich one, man. I really enjoyed that, for sure.
Yeah, it was great. Great to be back. We'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.